Hi, Xai'nyy of Planet Earth. This is Xai'nyy, and this episode is about the Xai'nyy life partner hierarchy. The life partner hierarchy is sort of like an advanced continuation of the social alchemy groupings that you already learned about. So on that you saw the inspirational grouping and also the same source and things like that. There's also a question of whether or not the grouping is giving you inspiration, augmentation, or suppression. Inspiration would be relationships where your powers are having their inspirational powers, pulling your powers and getting them to grow and expanding themselves outside of their native stories, but within the channel that is native to them, which is very energizing. Augmentation relationships will be with powers that you have already, so some form of Xai'nyy that's going to augment you. Now that's already been covered in social alchemy, but it's being specially focused on here because with life partners you're talking about two things. The fact that in order to be a life partner you need to have a complete story. That means, all 8 powers represented consciously between the two people that are relating with one another, and it needs to be a harmoniously complete story. So all 8 powers represented and in the correct levels to link up and create that unified story. On the other hand, this life partner is going to be the most intimate partner for you. So the gender of this person is going to be very important, and the fact that they're going to need to not be competing with you for the role that you do because they'll be around you too much. And at the most intimate level, all humans need a break from, being around just themselves, and they need to be completed. And that comes from the powers that they don't have represented in their conscious and in the right ratios. So now we'll talk about you, the Xai'nyy in particular. So the top life partners for you are going to be those that are the most inspiration, and there are 3 of them that you can think of it as like being in a pyramid, 1 at the apex and 2 on the base corners. At the apex you'll see the Xai'nyy, who also has Xai'nyy, V and Xai, and those 4 powers line up perfectly with yours. So they're the 4 powers that you don't have in the perfect ratios, which is the Zhes channel, then the Nez channel, then the Ves channel, and then the Zez channel. Also very inspiring to the Xai'nyy would be the Xai'nyy, although they won't be the most inspiring because even though they don't have most of the powers that you have in their conscious, they do have a repetition of the Vi and the Ni for their perception, so that's an issue, but it's still going to be very inspiring to have that Xi as their source power to go along with your Xai as your source power. The Naiji is also very inspiring for the Xai'nyy. They actually have the Xi and the Nai as their top 2 powers, and those are the most inspiring powers for Xai'nyy, but they're not in the perfect ratio because they have the Nez channel coming first and then the Zhes channel second, so that's a bit off. So it's very inspiring but not the ideal one. So the Xai'nyy and the Naiji make up that base of the inspirational triangle, and at the apex you have the Xai'nyy. Then there's augmentation. Now augmentation mojos are mojos that are similar to you. There'll be other Xai'nyy, but also the Xai'vi and also the Ni Xai. But in the context of an intimate life partner, you're going to have an issue that the powers are too similar. You don't have the full range of powers represented consciously, all the 8 powers going on for a complete storyline. So this is okay in a working relationship, but as far as an intimate relationship and all pervasive, that's going to be a problem because it's overlapping with and competing with what you naturally do consciously. So with life partners, there must not be competition of priority. So that's why all the inspirational relationships, you're going to have, the adaptives paired with directives, the objectives paired with subjectives, and so on, so that they don't compete but are favoring the same channels, and that's what you want to see. With augmentation powers, it's going to be getting your own powers stronger than what they are natively, but not expanding to the other 4 powers that you don't have in your conscious. So it's important to note that this is a very strong social alchemy, And it's the third or fourth, the augmentations show up in the recognition, the same source pairing and the inverse pairing. So a very strong energy, very strong bond. This is important to note because people often feel that a life partner or intimacy or sexual chemistry or love should feel very powerful, and that can happen without it being the ideal inspirational. It's very important that you understand this concept, because as a Xai'nyy, you'll have a very strong upgrading of your energy and your confidence by hanging out with the other Xai'nyy and Xai'vi and Xai'nyy. And this can become intimate, but it's more like you were intimate with a person that's on the job, like you know, like you're workaholic or working a lot, and you have that bond while on a mission, on a job. So whenever you hook up with creatures that are basically doing the same energetic job you are, it's sort of like you don't have a complete storyline, a complete life. You're basically hanging out, doing what you naturally do all the time, and then you're maybe like being intimate with one of your coworkers, and that may not necessarily be a bad thing, and there may even be a time when that's appropriate in your life, but that's not the ideal, and that doesn't complete you. A third energetic group that's worth mentioning here is called the suppression trio, and that has to do with the mojos that are further down, like the shades of me. So as a Xai'nyy, this is going to relate to the Z alpha, which are the Xai'vi and the Xai'nyy, and also the Xai'zi. So they're very, very different from you, and that's because their main powers are your modulation powers. There are other models of thought that teach that you should have, you know, a suppression relationship as your life partner, and they're wrong. That's completely absurd. The reason why this can happen, though, is because if you're in a weakened state and life's kind of kicking your butt and the world is on you about doing, you know, the Vi and the Z, having someone who can handle that Vi and Z well can feel good. You know, it can feel like a savior, and that sense of gratitude and security that may come from this may cause that your mojo to feel like a suppression relationship is actually helping you when it actually isn't. But this can be confusing, though, for two reasons. One, because as we mentioned, they're going to be good at doing stuff that modulates you. You know, so if you're under attack by things that are pulling on your modulation powers, being with someone who will modulate you but will also handle that for you will seem like a reprieve. The other thing is that the suppression trio, which has a lot of similarities in the way it looks to the inspiration trio. So as a Xai'nyy, you're ideally inspired by a Xai'nyy, and the Xai'nyy is energetically very different as far as the Z being the source. So it makes it a radically different creature, but it is a nest fighter, so there's the little similarity there. Both the Xai'nyy and the Xai'nyy are nest fighters, so they'll have a lot of variation, but they're kind of doing similar maneuvers, and it can be seen in similar motifs and in similar bubbles as you would see a Xai'nyy, so that can be kind of confusing. So as a Xai'nyy, you might be confused by a Nez fighter signal hitting you, because it seems to be strong at doing that objective discernment kind of stuff, you know, being good at pushing the dynamics, being cunning, and the things that you might look for, might want in your life partner to have. So if you're picking up on those Nez fighter signals and you don't really know how to read it fully energetically, you might confuse one nest fighter for the other, and interpret that as a good life partner for you, when it might not be. It might be a suppression, because their source power, like a Z alpha, source power actually will be modulating your Xai, which is not healthy, inspirational, you know, or a healthy, intimate relationship. And then you have other relationship types as well, like the compensation and the partitioning, which is comprised of the relationships pretty much with all the other mojos that are not in the groupings that we mentioned before, like the inspirational, the augmentation, and the suppression trios. So all the mojos that we haven't mentioned before, you could have them as an intimate life partner, but then there's always going to be some sort of variation of keeping them from certain parts of your life, because they're not going to be able to be part of those dances in that way in certain parts of your life, because they're not ideal inspirationals, or when they or when you do include them in those dances, they're going to have to spend more energy than they should, and also that you'll be spending more energy than you should, and you'll have to be doing special workarounds in order to get it to flow. However, those that do tend to come up more often are the ones in those triangles, the inspirational, the augmentation, and the suppression trios. And this will also relate to a Xai'nyy and a Xai'nyy mojo reading, when mojo reading. The fact that those three trios will have the most energetic effect for different reasons on a Xai'nyy. So when mojo reading, early on when you start mojo reading, you're going to need to feed yourself. As your psyche gets fed, then it'll want to do what is feeding it more, especially if it's, a good feeding. So when you're doing mojo reading, if you find something that's of interest to your psyche, then it will be easier for you to mojo read, because your psyche will be more geared up toward it. The signals will also pop out more, because energetically they are more important to you, because they inspire you, augment you, and because they suppress you. So know yourself, grow yourself, save the world.